This talk is a practitioner's reflection on the role that risk plays in participatory performance in video art. I draw from my experience as an artist and educator to examine how pedagogical concepts of productive risk and communities of practice apply to socially interactive performance artworks. By risk aesthetics, I refer to the artistic formation of practical action that arises from audience perceptions of risk as they learn to participate in a socially interactive performance or video artwork. I'm primarily interested in participatory artworks that are face-to-face activities hosted and facilitated by an artist or teacher for non-professional participants. Some excellent artworks in this category are thematically pedagogical and explicitly invoke the vocabulary of learning, therapy, or policy, such as the collaborative workshop formats used by contemporary artists like Adelita Husni Bey and Autumn Night. But I'm also interested in examining learning as a general formal property of socially interactive video and performance regardless of the work's premise. I look to artistic practice as a way to understand how practical action is transformed, both in playful and expressive situations like art projects and games, and in other domains of life like school and work. Synchronization Station is a participatory performance about mediated intimacy through live video. I created this work in 2022 and performed it in 2023 at Indexical, a media arts venue in Santa Cruz, California, and again in 2024 at AGBO in downtown Los Angeles as part of the Slam Dance Film Festival. The work is set in an imaginary moment in the history of human-computer interaction. Participants learn to use imaginary but functional communication technologies assembled out of a combination of new and old audiovisual equipment. In the show, a synthesizer-controlled video mixer blends live video of the hands of participants who take turns coming up to the stage in staggered pairs to create a continuous vertically scrolling composite image that emphasizes the physical co-presence of the hands within the screen as it is viewed by the participants and the audience. Each pair works silently together to interpret the instruction to synchronize by exploring the tactile image. Each pairing of participants is recorded and the final sequence is displayed back to the audience in a reflective and textural video synthesis performance. The audience transforms an initially incomprehensible situation into a moment of connection as they learn to non-verbally communicate through this unfamiliar perceptual configuration. I take on the role of a facilitator and performer by guiding the social and technical learning process around the artistic activity. Before the show, I approach each person individually as they arrive at the venue and ask, somewhat in character, if they are there to participate in the demonstration. If they are interested in participating, I give them a number and we use this to coordinate the pairs. They learn that only their hands will be recorded and that there's no voice recording. As the performance unfolds, the audience members observe each other's contributions and build a shared set of expectations around what it means to synchronize in this way. The video mix highlights some visual differences, such as skin color, symbolic jewelry, nail art, or signs of aging. The constrained scope of the project and the emerging moment of temporary shared understanding defines the risk of participation and makes it possible for each audience member to evaluate what it might mean for them to participate. Participatory performance can facilitate the creation of what education theorists Jean Leib and Etienne Wenger call a community of practice, which is a group of people who share a set of actions, relationships, and vocabularies related to an activity that they do together and which they recognize as meaningful. Leib and Wenger developed this concept in the context of formal and informal employment apprenticeship, through which novices become experts. They do this to show how learning broadly happens in practical situations in which people are doing things that they care about. And by becoming involved in the community of practice, we learn practical or technical skills, we learn the underlying ideas and knowledge and traditions that drive the activity, and we learn what it means to care about doing this thing. Communities of practice usually develop through a sequence of formal and informal learning over time. Aside from the blending of familiar and unfamiliar, one of the key characteristics that makes participatory artwork idiosyncratic might be that audience participation often takes place within a very short period of time and without much training, mentorship, or facilitation by the artist. It's very funny when the audience realizes that we are really doing this, we're making this video right now. As an artist who specializes in socially interactive performance and video art, and as an educator who designs and teaches hands-on learning projects incorporating tactile crafts for youth and adults, I'm very concerned with the capacity for an audience to actually participate in the activity that I'm hosting, to learn and to become practitioners of that activity, even if it is a completely fictitious and made-up thing for the sake of an art project. In my 18 years of experience designing hands-on projects for youth development or teacher training, including things like woodworking, electronics, and narrative movie-making projects, I have noticed a pattern that I call Bob. Bob happens when a participant in a project with a storytelling component is asked to name their character before they understand what it means to give their character a name. They know how to name things, and they know how to make things that are personally expressive, but they do not know what it means to name something in this project, or how to make this storytelling experience into something that is personally expressive for them. So they name their character Bob. Bob is a way to create distance between themselves and the project, to protect themselves from an ambiguous risk. Everyone has the capacity to creatively contribute to projects in a way that is personally expressive, but this is only possible when there is a clear criteria for self-evaluating your own contribution. Bob happens when there is no context. I often see this when children are given the prompt to create whatever they like, but without enough commitment on behalf of the hosting artist or teacher to understand how to adapt what they like to fit this activity. For this to happen, there must be a premise and a person who might be a teacher or an artist, but who plays the role of a host, who's taking responsibility for the existence and purpose of that premise. A premise can be established through a combination of location, duration, materials, and how these things are framed and made sensible to the participants through instructions, stories, questions, or other means. Children reach for Bob when the commitment is not provided and the identity of the host remains ambiguous. Audiences bring their prior experiences, knowledge, and identities to the activity, which informs their perceptions of what they are doing together and their relationships with the hosting artist and the other participants. But this is not an unlimited source of uncertainty, nor does it absolutely determine perceptions of risk. From the perspective of the participants, the premise might be an offering connected to the identity of the host, and they synthesize it with their interests and make it a part of their identity. And this might be another way of approaching early 20th century Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky's influential idea that learning happens in the zone of proximal development, in which the student's existing knowledge connects with the teacher's new knowledge. The creation of this contact point enables learners to take productive risks that expand their knowledge. Understanding this contact point is essential for creating participatory performances in which people actually do things. Historian Natalie Herron observes that Fluxus performance art and event scores developed in the mid-20th century are about actually doing the thing in a particular time and place and with people. The event score highlights the material and embodied specificity of each interpretation of the work. Fluxus performance works are often characterized by minimally worded instructions that may seem very ambiguous. However, Fluxus performance practices provide a great rubric for establishing a premise, defining the scope of participation, and constraining risk so that participants learn to participate in the activity, even when the activity might be considered bizarre, unfamiliar, risky, or transgressive. Yoko Ono's 1964 performance work Cut Piece offers a familiar example of an artwork that incorporates audience participation and implicitly invokes the theme of risk. The performer kneels before an audience next to a pair of scissors lying on the ground. The audience is given the single word instruction, cut, although some performances may have included more details to specify that the audience is invited to cut off a piece of the performer's clothing and take it with them. The audience initially faces the awkward situation of figuring out what to do next. In the absence of any prior experience cutting clothes while the person is wearing them in public, there is hesitancy to do anything. But someone inevitably makes an initial contribution by cutting off a small piece of clothing. Others might begin to test to see how Ono will react to aggressive cuts or threatening gestures, or attempts to reframe the activity through humor or behavior that comments on the piece. And just a side note, these are familiar kind of classroom behaviors. Just sort of testing the boundaries of the activity. Like, what are we really doing here? Why are we doing this? For example, the documentation of Ono's performance of Cut Piece at Carnegie Hall in 1965, filmed by Albert and David Maisels, concludes with a very rude young man who rushes the performance to its end by making several large cuts. In Cut Piece, the audience is exposed to scrutiny through their interpretation of ambiguous instructions. The way the audience copes with ambiguity becomes part of the artwork. The work becomes a portrait of the audience, their identities, their assumptions about the work, and the power they imagine themselves holding in relation to the performer as they learn to participate. In the 2024 exhibition, Yoko Ono, Music of the Mind at Tate Modern in London, the Maisels Cut Piece film was installed in a space next to a participatory installation version of another 1964 performance by Ono titled Bag Piece. The original instructions for Bag Piece describe two performer participants entering an opaque bag together and removing their clothes. But the installation instead presented two bags that individuals entered separately. And this is actually a video. This could be seen as a less risky version of the piece, but this change might also be interpreted to be prioritizing actual participation, composing the work to fit the circumstances of people of all ages dropping by in a museum. People took off their shoes, went into the bag, observed each other doing it, and learned how to participate, and took opportunities to take risks that might have meant something to them in this context, building a community of practice that exists across these moments. I'm in the bag. Cut Piece and Bag Piece might illustrate a spectrum of audience risk levels in participatory art. In Cut Piece, Ono creates a situation in which the audience thinks she is absorbing the risk, so they wind up feeling comfortable making themselves very visible. While in Bag Piece, the identities of the participants are absorbed into a shared expressive medium. Participation means being involved in the action, and this is a concept that could really be used to describe just about anything. For example, viewing a painting in a museum could be participatory because we have to get to the museum, position ourselves so that we can see the painting, and the saccades of eye movement arguably transform the fixed image into an emerging montage of perceptions and thoughts. But still, the concept of participation is more likely to be invoked to describe some art experiences more than others. Art that is explicitly recognized and labeled as participatory might be characterized by the need for the audience to learn a new activity, or an activity somehow made newly unfamiliar. Artists can proactively shape situations of social learning in a world in which communication is massively facilitated by commercial and political interests that want to isolate people and create conflict. Understanding the forms of inclusion in socially engaged art is increasingly relevant for the whole domain of art because younger audiences grow up with the presumption that all media is participatory and that experience is an extension of a massive moving image system that is the world. If artists want participants to actually do things in their work, they must consider the conditions of risk that exist for participants because of the formal conditions of their work, and have a plan to honor the purposeful risks taken by participants.
Thank you.